Great. I'll give folks a few minutes to enter the webinar.
We are currently at 55 attendees.
Woo! That's pretty good. So Caitlin, how are we doing? Or we still have folks joining. Looks like the webinar will be recorded. So Karen asked that question as we knew folks would. So yeah, the webinar will be recorded. We're just waiting for folks to continue populating before we get started. But you'll be able to find the webinar on the county's YouTube page. So if you just search LEAP and today's date, the webinar will be available there. Okay, in the sake of like kind of keeping on time, I suggest we go ahead and get started. So with that said, Paula, are you ready for me to turn it over to you? You look like you're in a moving vehicle. You're on mute though, Paula.
Thank you. I was trying to get to a better location. I had to help my mom this morning, and unfortunately, it ran longer than I thought it would. So I am in my car. So my apologies for that. So thank you all for joining. It's exciting to see that so many people have attended this webinar. We've set these monthly meetings up so that people can get their questions answered. I know that there have been a lot of changes to the program over the last few months, and this is our way of collecting together as a group to make sure that you understand all of the updates and changes to the program. And also you can learn from each other's questions and get clarity by asking questions of all of us on the call today. So thank you for your participation. This is indeed the Mendocino County LEAP program meeting scheduled for January 19th, 2022. Next slide, please. The agenda, as it is for all of the meetings, we will talk, about the funding sources. We will give you updates on the LEAP program statistics, and then we will talk a little bit more about the changes that have been made to the program. And then we'll go into the Q&A session where anyone who wants to ask a question or make a comment will be given 2 minutes to do so. So thank you. Great. And Kristen, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So kind of going back to the agenda, I just want to make sure everyone's aware as to how they can participate in this meeting today. So either at the top or the bottom of your screen, you should have a panel that has icons on it, one of them being a Q&A panel, which gives you the opportunity to click onto the Q&A feature and then drop a question at any time during the meeting into that Q&A feature chat box. All of us here who are administering the webinar will be able to see that question. Usually we don't respond to those questions until the end of the program when we get into the Q&A session. So don't be discouraged if you drop a question in at the beginning and we don't get to it till the end. It's just easier for us to go back. And then oftentimes what we find is that the question that one person has, a number of people have that question or similar questions. So waiting until the end so we can kind of compile and consolidate questions would be really helpful. But I did just see this question about enabling closed captioning. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to ask Caitlin, who is our administrator guru of this program, to see. Caitlin, do you have any insights on that? Is that something we can do?
I am currently looking through the settings in Zoom to see if that is something that we can do. I think we can. But let me see.
So one thing for folks to be aware of is that when we put up the video footage on the YouTube channel, the presentation will go with it. I don't know if there's a way to enable closed captioning once it's recorded. Caitlin, what did you find out?
So it looks like the only options for closed caption is to assign a participant to type everything, or one of us panelists to type everything, or to use a third-party closed captioning tool, which we currently don't have.
Okay. So in the moment, I think it'd be hard to prepare us to have someone type, but I do really appreciate the request, and I think it's, I think we can consider how to potentially navigate this in the future. So I'm not giving necessarily a great response. Usually there is an option down in the menu, but we only have raised hands. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know that we have an advanced enough program to do this, but I'm also seeing that when we post the video to YouTube, one of the attendees is seeing that closed captioning is added after about 24 hours. So I think for the sake of getting us going, I apologize for folks who I don't know. We haven't made it available, but we can look to see in the future how we can do this better. And I don't know that we have an advanced enough in YouTube program in 24 hours. Video will definitely be there. So hopefully it will be available. The closed captioning option will be available when you look back at the video on YouTube. I'm gonna just I'm just going to put these as answered so that we don't get a little overwhelmed here. Okay, sorry for the housekeeping. So please use the Q&A panel if you have questions that come up throughout the course of the meeting. They'll be saved and then we'll be able to address them at the end of the meeting. And we'll make ample time available. We'll also make time available for folks who want to just get on the line with us and ask their questions. So the Q&A is not the only feature option you have. We will again make time to hear comments and questions above and beyond the Q&A feature. LEAP funding. Currently we're working out of the first allocation. So the current allocation is about 2.2 million, a little over 2.2 million. And out of that, 80% of that total fund has been allocated to direct grants, fee waivers, and workforce development. 10% of that funding has been allocated for technical assistance, which is a specific category. If you went onto the elevateimpactmendo.org website, you would find the technical assistance programs, and those are largely workshops and webinars and training sessions. And then 10% has been set aside for administrative services. So the Elevate Impact team are our administrative contractors, and they have not been provided a 10% payout up front. They bill us as they do the work. So I just want to make sure that that's clear for everyone. LEAP program statistics. I want to make everyone aware that we have updated this to clarify the difference between approved and completed underwriting. So we've been having a lot of, I would say, kind of communication and nomenclature challenges Previously, these tables had listed approved in the area that really references that they've completed underwriting. So completed underwriting means that you submitted a complete application to the Elevate team and they've worked with you to make sure that your application is complete, meets all the criteria the grant program or the equity program has put into place. And then approved is when the department has approved that application and moved it into our processing system for signatures. So right now, as far as LEAP eligibility is concerned, we've had 165 folks complete application. 91 of those applications have gone to the LEAP team and are engaged. 69 are currently in the underwriting process with the LEAP team. 91 of them have completed the underwriting process, meaning that they've been also, in the case of eligibility, approved as eligible applicants for the equity program. So far, 5 folks who have completed applications have been deemed ineligible or they've abandoned their applications as far as eligibility is concerned. With the direct grants, 63 folks have completed direct grant applications online. 43 folks are engaged in underwriting with the LEAP team or with the Elevate Impact team. 19 folks have completed their underwriting. We have 1 direct grant that I'm aware of that's approved, that's working through our system right now. And then a few more that are under review by the department to make sure that we're ready to move them forward in processing. Fee waivers, 52 completed fee waiver applications via the website. 43 are in underwriting. 8 of them have completed underwriting. And I know that we've approved some, but I apologize. Today got crazy and it was up to the department to fill in this number. And I did not have time to pull this number and didn't remember it, frankly, until we got to this slide. So I know we've processed at least 3 of them where folks have used them for fees in the cannabis program, but I don't have the exact details for this slide going into the presentation. So my apologies there. Technical assistance. 34 folks have applied for technical assistance through the website. 25 of those folks are still in the underwriting process, working with the Elevate team to complete those applications and finalize the work. 9 have completed the applications fully, the underwriting process with the Elevate team, and all 9 of those that have completed their underwriting have been approved for technical assistance programs. The last column here just is the total of each of these line items. I'm also going to talk about fee waivers. So I'm going to hang on to the floor here for a minute. There's been a lot of confusions between what is a fee waiver and what should go into your direct grant. So we're going to try to clear that up right now. Fee waivers can be used for any county fee, right? And that's kind of the easiest way to think about it. Fee waivers are for like any permit renewal, and we'll go into more depth, related building permit. But the fee waiver program itself is a pool of monies dedicated for fee waivers that we actually transfer to the other department. So it's like writing the applicant a gift certificate, and then we transfer the funds when they spend that gift certificate. It's kind of an easy way to think about it. So fee waivers cannot be used for state fees, whether that's a Department of Cannabis Control fee, State Water Resource Control Board fee, DFW fee, because we don't have the ability to make the transfer. Any of those fees, and we'll talk about this a lot during the presentation, would have to go into your direct grant, and we'll continue to clarify. So easy chart here. This is from the Cannabis Program website. On the main page is our fee, our Cannabis Program fee schedule. Any of these Cannabis Program fees that you are utilizing would be eligible for a fee waiver, right? So if you were applying for a phase 2 cultivation application, you could have your initial application review, inspection, and issuance fee covered by a fee waiver, for example. Any renewal or modification, right, could be covered by a fee waiver. Your Appendix G fees are eligible for a fee waiver, so on and so forth. What's not eligible for a fee waiver would be tax appeal and tax appeal hearing. We'll talk about that again in a couple of slides. But other fees that are eligible, that are fees that are in relationship to departments outside of the cannabis program, would be any planning and building service fee that is required for your cannabis permit. So if you're a cultivator and you have to permit, say, your hoop houses, so you have a bunch of egg exempt permits that you need in order to be compliant with and finish the processing of your application, perhaps, those egg exempt permits, those fees would be eligible for fee waivers, as would any commercial building or greenhouse permits that are directly related to your cannabis operation. Also, if you needed a grading permit because you're installing a cannabis irrigation pond, or say you're doing your culvert replacement for your lake and streamlet alteration agreement, those fees with planning and building would be eligible for a fee waiver. Same with Department of Environmental Health. If you are drilling a well and pulling a well permit for that well to be your cannabis irrigation source, that well permit would qualify for a fee waiver, as would, say, commercial septic permits, because you need a commercial septic system for your employees. Just some examples. I'm sure there's other things that qualify that aren't on this list, but we wanted to make sure that we provided some examples of what does qualify. And then we'll talk a bit about what's not eligible. So, for example, Class K residential building permits. Class K residential building permits are not eligible for fee waivers, A, because they're residential structures, B, you can't have employees in those residential structures. So there's no way for us to link that together with your cannabis operation because you're not supposed to be using it as a cannabis location. If you have a garage or something that you're utilizing, it's going to require a commercial permit upgrade to utilize that building, and then that commercial permit upgrade would be eligible, but not the Class K residential. Grading permits for non-cannabis irrigation related ponds. So if you have a pond that's for domestic use, fire use, supplemental gardens, and it's not for cannabis irrigation, we cannot provide you a fee waiver for that pond permit, aka grading permit, because it's not for cannabis irrigation purposes. Fee waivers. You can't get a fee waiver for a state annual water board fee, but you can apply for that as a budget line item on your direct grant. State licenses, application fees at the state level through the Department of Cannabis Control, they may be eligible for a fee waiver through the Department of Cannabis Control's fee waiver program, not the local fee waiver program. So when you come back to this, and it has been right on the front page of the Department of Cannabis Control website, if you go to cannabis.ca.gov/applicants/equity-fee-waivers/, they have a whole page up right now talking about who's eligible, how to qualify, how to fill out the application. And what I'm also seeing and hearing is that they are open to reimbursements for, like, say you just paid your fee, your state licensing fee. So if you're looking for a fee waiver specifically for your DCC license, please do contact the state, look at their website, and see if you're eligible for their fee waiver program, because equity applicants have met a lot of the eligibility requirements right off the bat. And then B, they have a great map up on their website where they are identifying communities that were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And according to their map, almost everyone in the county appears to be eligible. So I would encourage folks, if you don't want to put your state application and licensing fee into your direct grant and you want some sort of fee waiver, to please look at what resources the state might have for you to use a fee waiver provided by the Department of Cannabis Control. A little bit about direct grants. Yes,
Kristen? Yeah, I think there are a number of questions that came in on fee waivers specifically, so I'd like to read them to you and just have the fee waiver questions answered now before we move to direct grants while it's fresh in everybody's mind. Is that okay?
Sure. I don't see why not.
Okay, so these will just be fee waiver questions. Let's see. If we're still going back and forth with our representative on direct grant budgets, are our fee waivers still moving forward separately? The answer to that is yes. How do we know if fee waivers are moving forward and when they will be usable? Your fee waivers are moving forward independent of your direct grant application. And if you need a status, please email your underwriter, or you can email me, Paula, at elevateimpactmendo.com, and I can get you an update on your specific status. But the direct grant moves on a different path than your fee waiver. So those two things are not linked together in terms of processing. There is a separate state fee waiver program. Can you please mention that while someone has to be eligible for the local program to get the state license fee waiver, you do not have to yet have been approved in order to apply for a state license fee waiver? I believe that is correct. You do not have to have local eligibility to apply for the state license fee waiver program. Is that your understanding as well, Kristen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you have already been approved through your local jurisdiction as an eligible equity applicant, that only expedites, right, your application processing for a state fee waiver. But you can qualify for an equity fee waiver without having been qualified by your local jurisdiction. Some local jurisdictions don't have these programs in place, right? So the state wants to make sure that the equity fee waiver program the Department of Cannabis Control is providing is open to anyone who may have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, regardless of whether or not their local jurisdiction has implemented an equity program. And so there's a couple of different ways to qualify for the state program, and that information is all available on their website. And one of the tools they put up to help folks looking to qualify is a map that helps you identify whether or not you are in a neighborhood or area of the state that has been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So you might qualify because of your neighborhood, right? So just an example, but there's some other criteria that you can look into. It's all on the state's website.
Great. Here's another question. Let's see. Is the fee waiver part of the funds from the LEAP grant? So the direct LEAP grant is a separate allocation to each entrepreneur. And on top of the money that you receive from your LEAP direct grant, you can also receive fee waivers. Okay, so those are two separate grant programs that you can apply for at under the LEAP program at Mendocino County. Okay, what is the allowed distribution amount for fee waivers? Each LEAP eligible fee waiver recipient can receive up to $7,000 in fee waivers. Okay. Let's see. If we submit a budget and an application for a $50,000 direct grant, can we still apply for the fee waiver? Yes, you can. The fee waivers are on top of the $50,000 direct grant. Okay. Let's see. I think, can we also apply for fee waivers as well as direct grant? Absolutely. Is the state fee waiver a tax credit? I actually don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer to that, Kristen?
I don't, but the fee, I don't think it can qualify for a tax credit because it's not a tax, it's a fee.
Right.
Fees and taxes have very different statutory definitions and they function differently. So I don't think you can apply a tax credit to a fee waiver or to a fee. So I actually think it is strictly a fee waiver and wouldn't qualify as a tax credit. Unless Kristen, the question is about how the applicant might declare that fee waiver amount on their taxes. And that question, I would encourage you to ask your accountant and or your tax attorney, because I can't speak to how you may have to account for it or not when doing your income taxes at the end of the year.
Kristen, this is Bruce. Just one thing to clarify about the fee waivers. I think a lot of people are applying for the fee waiver in their application, but they're unaware and they say, well, I have my annual fee due sometime this year. What actually triggers the application beyond that? What do they need to submit? Do they need the invoice from you, an email? There's some confusion when people check fee waiver on the application. They assume they're applying for it, and that's not quite the case.
Right, so you need to identify the fee waivers you are wanting to apply for. We don't invoice, say, a permit holder for an annual renewal that might not need to occur or that they might choose not to go forward with. We don't send at 6 months or 30 days prior to your renewal an invoice for the cost of that renewal. We're getting prepared to send reminder notices, but it is up to the applicant who files the renewal, right, to pay for the renewal upon filing it. So, you know, it really is up to the applicant to say, okay, I know what I need to do over the course of the next year. I'm going to need to turn in my Appendix G. So I'm going to have that fee that I'd like to have covered. I'm going to apply for that one. I'm going to need to renew my permit. So I'm going to apply for that fee. I might want to change from outdoor to mixed light. So I think I should apply for a modification fee. I mean, these are examples, but we don't make invoices in preparation for a fee waiver. And you really want to make sure that you're using this resource. It is available on the website if you're applying for cannabis program fees. It's on the main page of the program website. You just have to scroll down and then you'll find this chart that Caitlin put together that lists the cannabis program fees. All of these are eligible for fee waivers.
Yes, and the link to the chart is actually at the bottom of the slide. So when you download the presentation after it's made available, you can see the link. If you click on that link or cut and paste the link into your browser, it'll take you to this chart.
Okay. Any other questions, Paula?
No, that's it on fee waivers. I think we can move to direct grants now.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
So direct grants. So the state allows the direct grant program to provide funding for commercial cannabis businesses for startup expenses and ongoing expenses, right? That's it. It's like pretty simple language. And then local jurisdictions have to justify their criteria fits into the startup or ongoing expenses category, essentially, right? And sample business expenses are on this next page here. So, for example, business-related rent or lease would be considered an ongoing or startup expense. So if you're renting property or commercial space for your dispensary, right, that rent or lease could be covered in your direct grant in full or in part. Any fixtures or equipment that you need for your cannabis operations, such as laptops, computers, or tablets, that say you're going to need to enter your data into Metric would qualify. Printers for your office space, perhaps a mobile phone, Software such as a point of sale system, a safe or security cameras or desks, right? Or a reception area for your dispensary. These items would qualify under fixtures and equipment. And then local and state application and licensing and regulatory fees. Again, if you're not going to use the state fee waiver, for some reason you don't qualify for the state fee waiver for your state license application fee and your state licensing fee, you are eligible to fold that cost into your direct grant application. And regardless if it's the first time that you're applying for a state license or it's your renewal, right? They would both qualify for direct grant opportunities. Additional regulatory fees that you might want to put into your direct grant application could be your annual water monitoring fee for the State Water Resource Control Board or your lake and stream bed alteration agreement notification fees with DFW. Those also would qualify, and there may be others that we're not pointing out currently. Legal assistance would qualify, such as setting up your corporation or your entity if you choose to do so, or getting a packaging analysis before you buy all of your packaging, right, to make sure that your packaging is compliant before you purchase a bunch of pre-printed packaging, just examples. And then additional items that might fit into regulatory compliance are a variety of insurance needs. So general liability could be eligible. Distribution licenses do have a state required liability insurance component. That cost would be eligible because it would be considered a startup or ongoing expense. However, general liability could also be covered in your direct grant if you are engaged in capital improvements and you need to expand or acquire liability insurance to engage in those capital improvements outlined in your grant application. Workers' compensation insurance for your cannabis business would be applicable. Also, auto insurance may be applicable if you're operating a distribution facility, a self-transport facility, or a delivery retail facility. Auto insurance would be applicable. If the County of Mendocino's Risk Management Department said, hey, in order for us to move you forward or approve this grant application, you need to have, elevated auto insurance liability requirements, that policy that's required per the grant itself would be eligible to be covered by the direct grant. But just your personal auto insurance policy would not be eligible for the direct grant. Every state licensee needs a surety bond. Those surety bonds are eligible for direct grant funding. And then there may be some other insurance pieces that could be eligible. I know William came up with one earlier and the heck of me cannot remember it. So William, I know you had some other ideas on this too. Maybe you could share.
Yeah, potentially if you were opening a marijuana business like a dispensary, I can imagine you'd have business associated insurance costs. And so that would definitely be an other.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then we've got packaging, accounting, and bookkeeping on here. This is not a end all be all list, right? It's really showing the underwriters and the department that what you're listing here is a regulatory compliance expense. And that's how we move it forward. It falls into this category. Testing of cannabis, your cannabis testing fees, it's kind of a regulatory compliance expense, frankly, and would also be eligible for direct grant coverage. Capital improvements such as architecture fees, plot plan designs, engineers if you need them, and then build out costs to bring the space into compliance. These are all examples of capital improvements that are eligible for direct grant funding. And then there's workforce training and retention, also eligible for direct grant funding. And then some others, right? So if you have a marketing and advertising program that you're looking to fund, that could be eligible for direct grant funds. We've got an inventory software program or inventory staff that you want to build up, also eligible. Consultants, say you need consultants to prepare your Appendix G, as an example. Those all would fall into this other category, and also standard payroll expenses, right? That's an ongoing and startup expense is managing payroll, setting up a payroll account and or having a payroll service and or some of the other expenses associated with doing payroll. What's not eligible? So this is somewhat of a painful conversation because we've been having a lot of conversations about taxes, and I want to sincerely apologize for misunderstanding the board's direction at the October 5th meeting. I came away from that meeting really feeling like the board had given the department the ability to allow folks to use the direct grant fund to cover the costs associated with cannabis business taxes. When we processed the first few applications in December, County Council went, whoa, wait a minute. We didn't hear that. And then between the department and County Council, I think we probably spent around 12 hours re-listening to that meeting and taking notes and having discussions. And what came back was that the motion absolutely did not cover reference to any sort of taxes or tax reimbursement or tax funding for direct grants. And there was a directive kind of in the middle of the conversation that required the department to essentially collect business taxes and prioritize those who have paid their business taxes in full. So that put a grinding halt on processing any applications, grant agreement applications, until we could get a list of folks who were delinquent or not delinquent on their business taxes, their cannabis business taxes. With the holidays, that took quite some time. I think William sent everyone who had been determined to be equity eligible over to the tax treasurer and collector's office between Christmas and New Year, and we didn't hear back from them with a mostly complete list until like the end of the first week of January when we returned from the break. So this has created quite the hiccup and ripple in the program moving forward, and we apologize for that. Take responsibility for misunderstanding what the board said, and then it just took a lot of time to unwind. So currently, anything tax related is not eligible. So if you want your grant, your direct grant to be processed in a timely fashion, the easiest thing to do is to eliminate any tax related asks, including for fee waivers, tax appeals and tax appeal hearing fees. And for direct grants, anything related to cannabis business taxes, personal income taxes, business related income taxes, property taxes, and any other kind of tax you can think of. I would say leave it out, because the only way we can potentially change this is to go back to the Board of Supervisors and have them approve some sort of taxation opportunity, right, for this program. We have inquired. We don't have any timing available or provided back to us about when we might be able to bring this item forward. So I would recommend not waiting if it's urgent for you to receive funds. You could leave the tax amount off and then potentially, when there's clarification, apply for that additional amount. But if you swap the tax items that you wanted in your direct grant for other items to bring your direct grant total up to $50,000, and then the board down the road approves, tax relief in some way, you won't be eligible to come back and ask for that tax relief. You would, so we can't allow you to spend more than $50,000 in the direct grant process. And then we did have some conversation with the state about taxes in general and what is eligible. So Delinquent or back cannabis business taxes, even if the board wanted to approve those for direct grants, the state would not allow them because they don't qualify as a startup or ongoing expense. But cannabis business taxes going forward may be eligible. Personal or business related income taxes may be eligible. And the question about property taxes is pretty challenging because it would have to be property taxes that are related to just a cannabis business. And when you have property taxes that have your residence and your cannabis business commingled, I think it would be pretty hard to separate that for the sake of property taxes. So I don't think we'll be able to bring property taxes back to the forefront, but we are having some conversation about whether or not the items such as cannabis business taxes going forward and personal and business related income taxes, if the board has interest in hearing those items. Paula, do you want to answer some direct grant questions before we go to deadlines? Is that your preference at this time? Okay, absolutely. So I'm going to turn it over to you to help us with that.
Okay. Can we reprioritize? Can we drop something else to cover the taxes if the board revisits the tax issue? So I think Kristen was pretty clear that if you want your grant processed as quickly as possible, you should not include taxes on your direct grant budget because we have to wait for a Board of Supervisors meeting to approve whatever form of taxes they want to approve, but that's going to take time, and that meeting has not been scheduled. So if you want to receive your direct grant as quickly as possible, do not include taxes in your budget. I think that's the fastest way to get things done. Is there a maximum dollar amount for the direct grant? Yes, the maximum dollar amount is $50,000. Can they get direct grant funding to pay the, it looks like that's a question in the middle. So let me come back to that. Can you please explain if the state application permit fees are not eligible for the Mendocino grant, why is a state required bond eligible? So I don't think that that's right. I think that state application permit fees are eligible for the Mendocino direct grant. They're not eligible for a Mendocino fee waiver, but you can put that as a line item on your budget. Isn't that correct, Kristen?
Yeah, that's correct. So any of your state application or licensing fees, your State Water Resource Control Board fees, your Department of Fish and Wildlife fees, those fees can be included in the direct grant program, but not the local fee waiver program.
Great. Is the direct grant fund going to be payable to the business or the individual applying? So it's at the entrepreneur's choice. If you apply for a direct grant as an individual and you submit your W-9 as an individual, the grant check will be written to you as an individual. If you apply as a business and you complete your W-9 as a business, the direct grant check will be sent to you as a business. Now, here is the caveat. If you apply as a business, you have to own that business 100%. The LEAP eligible person who's received the eligibility letter has to be the 100% owner of the business in order to apply for the grant funds as a business. Okay? What is elevated auto insurance for? I'm not sure about the word elevated, but as Kristen explained earlier, if your cannabis business involves using a vehicle, like you're a delivery business, you're a transporter business, or you're a distribution business, then you are required to have auto insurance.
And then I think, let me just add to that if I might, Paula. In some cases,
of course,
it's possible that risk may look at your grant application and determine that increased auto liability is necessary. If that's the case, that increased auto liability policy, the cost of that increased auto liability policy, that cost would be eligible for direct grant budget line item. And I think, an example of what might trigger risk to determine that increased auto eligibility or liability is required would be, say, you're doing earth moving work and you're going to rent the bulldozer, right? And you're going to haul it yourself, right? So you're going to rent it and haul it yourself. Risk may look at that and say, okay, they're hauling this expensive piece of equipment. We want to make sure that there is, I think it's a $1 million liability policy for that automobile that's going to be doing that hauling. If you're picking up, trailering, and hauling your own culverts to put in for your fish and wildlife projects, for example. But we haven't had risk come back yet and say, this needs increased auto liability policy. It's possible, but we have not experienced that yet.
Great, thank you. Let's see. My rep says I need to have a scope of work from my CPA and lawyer since they are in my budget. I understand getting a scope of work from a contractor, but is it necessary to have a scope of work from these other necessary professionals? I would agree that the term scope of work is pretty better applied to a contractor and not to a lawyer and a CPA. But what I've often gotten when I've worked with a CPA or a lawyer is a letter. It's an estimate for services. It's literally one paragraph that says, I'm going to help, Paula with her bookkeeping and taxes, and we estimate that it's going to take, 30 hours and my hourly rate is $100. And that's all that the letter says. The thing that we have to be mindful of is we might be audited by the state and they want to understand where the dollars were spent and what is the paper trail that we had to ensure that the dollars were spent in eligible ways. And that's why we're asking for invoices and estimates and engagement letter is what I just described that you typically get from a CPA or a lawyer. Just something on paper that quantifies the amount of the budget item that you intend to spend with a third party. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that, Kristen?
No, I think I can come back to some other questions I'd like to answer when we do Q&A.
Okay, great. Next question. Are any of these expenses retroactive? So currently, the way the Mendocino County LEAP Direct Grant Program is structured is monies cannot be used for expenses in the past. Those are the terms that we're operating under currently. If you've already paid for this is not, this is not a cost reimbursement program. It's for future expenses. And so your direct grant should identify expenses that you have not yet paid. Let's see. Taxes, both local and income, are ongoing expenses. Yes, that is indeed correct. But again, as Kristen just described, the Board of Supervisors has not yet made a formal proposal on the types of taxes that will be allowable under the direct grant program. And if you want to get your grant processed quickly, instead of waiting for that approval, we recommend that you do not include direct taxes in your direct grant budget. Let's see. I'm going to come back to that question. I'll come back to that question. I think those are most of the questions that deal with fee waivers. So why don't we move to the next section, and I will pick up these questions at the end, the other questions at the end. Okay? Hello?
Yeah, so Paula, I changed the slides. Are you still doing the deadlines section?
Yeah, I'm gonna. Okay. Yeah, you can go ahead and do the deadlines, and then we'll move to the Q&A.
Okay, so we do have some deadlines in place, and these are not deadlines that mean, you must apply by this time or we're closing the program. These are deadlines to ensure that we have a cutoff for processing applications for the first round of funds, right? So what we are trying to prevent with these deadlines is someone who might want to receive monies out of the first round of funds, but then not be able to submit an application until the 20th of February. Right? So we're trying to make sure that we give ourselves enough lead time to hopefully process everyone who comes in who would like funding out of the first round of equity funds that the county has received. So the MCP intends to distribute the first round of grant funds by February 28th of this year. So in order to do that, we're asking everyone who wants to be in that first funding pool that your LEAP applications and your direct grant, fee waiver, and technical assistance applications be filed by February 1st of 2022. Now, these dates are probably a little tricky, and you'll want to get your LEAP eligibility application in earlier because you need the LEAP eligibility approval to finalize your filing for your direct grants. But there's nothing that prevents you as an applicant from scoping your direct grant application, your fee waiver application materials, your technical assistance application materials while you're managing your LEAP eligibility application online with the Elevate team. So, if you want to be part of this first funding round, please don't hesitate to get your materials in via the website and into the hands of the Elevate team so they can do the underwriting magic that they do with our applicant pool. So I wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. Once we run through the funds that need to be distributed by February 28th, we will then be moving into the next round of funds, which is substantially smaller. So this is really just to help ensure that we have timelines available to manage our processing. And with that said, I think we can go to Q&A. Go ahead. I do want to respond to a couple of things if we can before we get into the bulk of the questions. Because I want to pick up just a couple of threads that we left off on. So there was a question that came up about Class K building permits for fee waivers and why they aren't eligible. I can't say that they aren't eligible 100% of the time. For example, there is a clause in the 10A17 cultivation and nursery ordinance that says if you're on a parcel that's this size or smaller, you must have a permanent residence on that parcel in order to conduct cultivation and or nursery activities or operations. That permanent residence is a regulatory requirement. I think the question here is, are new residences eligible for owner builder? I don't know. So I think it's going to be hard to qualify any Class K. There may be special circumstances where that can qualify, but in general, it's going to take a lot of review, and it's probably not going to be a frequent qualifier. The question about needing a residence to conduct a micro business on rangeland kind of speaks to this, or has the same answer as if the ordinance requires a residence in order for you to conduct an activity, you may be able to qualify that residential permit as a regulatory expense and make it eligible. But again, it would need to have some due diligence done on it. And most Class K permits will not qualify for fee waiver. There was also a question that came up about whether or not the MCP is willing to recommend to the BOS that they revise the program to include any state taxes and local fees. I can say that what we have done is sent a list of agenda items, of items that we know we would like to bring forward to the board. The changes to the equity program to include taxes that are allowed under state guidelines and statute is in that list. But we know that there's some taxes that won't qualify. So we'll be sticking with what we've had conversation with the state that we know the state will allow us to qualify. We aren't going to bring other tax items to the board if the state has already told us they may not qualify. So I just wanted to make sure that we address that we have done some due diligence and we are waiting to hear back as to whether or not the board is going to be available to hear that item and when they might hear that item. And we're still doing due diligence with the state on that item specifically. Paula, I can hand it back to you. You're on mute, Paula.
All right, I'll just go back. Sorry about that. I'll just go back through the Q&A and go through the question. Okay. The Q&A. All right. Rumor has it the state allows equity grant money to be allocated for income taxes. Does the county allow this allocation? Currently, no. That would have to go back to the Board of Supervisors for approval.
And
Next question.
I want to say something else about that too. Just because the state allows it, I talked to the state about other jurisdictions. They are not aware of other jurisdictions who do allow income taxes at this time. They said the city of Los Angeles had asked the same question. So we're trying to get some additional clarification. The state is also trying to get some additional clarification about how that might work. Some of the challenges when we're looking at income taxes is that my income tax percentage may be different from Williams or Paula's or Bruce's. And so how do we provide monies up front when we don't have an income tax statement showing what percentage? So we are trying to figure out how that might work as a mechanism. And we are reaching out to the city of Los Angeles to try to see if they've figured it out. And I know the state was trying to figure it out too. So we're still doing some research on that piece because it's definitely not simple to manage. So I apologize for interrupting you, Paula, but I just wanted to make sure folks were aware that it's a little more in depth than just saying yes or no to income taxes. There's some due diligence and we just have to figure out how the mechanisms would work.
Great. Next question. I've emailed questions to the LEAP program through the Elevate Impact Mendo website, however, have never received any responses. How do we contract the program to ask questions? Oh, that's probably a technology glitch, which I'm going to have to look into. You can email me, Paula at elevateimpactmendo.com. From a technology perspective, what I've noticed in the way that our website was set up and also in the way that some other questions come to us, when we hit respond, it actually doesn't go back to the person asking the question. It goes back to the person that was forwarding the question. And sometimes we don't get the original email. And that's what I mean by technology problem. So I'm going to have to figure out how to get the originator email address as opposed to what it typically says is questions from elevateimpactmendo.com. And there's other places where we get forwarded questions, but I don't have the originator email, and that's a problem. So please send me an email, Paula at elevateimpactmendo.com, and I'll work on the technology problem. Next question. How long does the eligibility screening?
Just a second. I want to say this too. I apologize.
No worries.
If you can't remember how to get a hold of Paula or the, Elevate email contact for your underwriter, you can send your question to cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org. I think a lot of you are familiar with that email address, and we'll forward it off to the Elevate team, to the individuals. And we find that we get really great response times from the Elevate team if we forward something from the cannabis program. So if you're having a communication glitch and you can't remember, like, I was working with Tiffany, but I can't remember her email address, you can send us an email at cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org, cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org. And we'll forward that over to your underwriter, or if it just needs to get to Elevate, we'll get it over to Paula and Bruce or whomever. So that's another resource for communication.
Great,
Go ahead,
thank
Paula.
you. Okay, how long does the eligibility screening take? Well, you know, it's really, it depended upon how many of the documents that you already have, how much of your own personal materials you've already prepared for the application. So all of the application questions are on the website, Elevate Impact Mendo, and you can go through and see what's going to be required of you to submit. And once you submit all of the application and they've been verified and nothing's expired and all of the records are in order, we can send you, approve you for eligibility. If I had to guess, on average, it takes 2 to 4 weeks with the back and forth and the feedback from the underwriter and you collecting the appropriate materials. But it usually takes about 2 to 4 weeks. But all of the required materials are on our website. And if you have those in hand before you begin the application process, it'll speed things up considerably. Okay, next question. Can personal auto insurance meet the insurance criteria, or do you need commercial auto insurance? Kristen?
I think this is a tricky one, because if you are a transport only license holder, you are required by the state to put that vehicle into the name of the licensee or the company that holds the license. So then you're likely going to be required by the state to have a commercial policy. But I think the key for us is showing that that vehicle is connected to the license, right? When you apply for a transport only license, you have to list the vehicles that you will be using for that transport. So we should be able to verify that the vehicle you're submitting information for, or a request for auto insurance, has been declared to the state as part of that licensed operation. I think just personal auto insurance is not going to be eligible. If you're not, like if you're a cultivator, I don't think personal auto insurance comes into play. I think an auto liability policy might come into play if risk says your grant application is going to require increased auto liability in order for you to proceed with the projects put into your direct grant, then we can cover that auto insurance, that increased liability portion. So, but not just your personal auto insurance. I hope that helps.
Okay, great. And if you have follow-up questions about that, feel free to email us. All right, next question. Please define the differences between the grant program versus the equity program versus the direct grant program. Okay, so the title of the program, and this is title only, is the LEAP Local Equity Entrepreneurial Program. That is the formal title of the program. Now, the LEAP Entrepreneurial Equity Program has 3 grant programs that it's administering. It's administering the fee waiver grant program, it's administering the technical assistance program, and it's administering the direct grant program. The fee waiver program, Kristen explained earlier in our conversation, are Mendocino County fees that can be waived for specific projects in Mendocino County that are qualified under the LEAP program. So that simply means you don't have to pay the fee because the fee has been waived through the fee waiver program. The technical assistance program will be webinars and one-on-one coaching for people who are starting their cannabis businesses and want a little bit of coaching to help them launch and grow their business. That's a different service. The final program is the direct grant program, where LEAP qualified individuals can apply for up to $50,000 in cash funding to use towards their local Mendocino County cannabis business. So those are the 3 programs, all of which fall under the Local Equity Entrepreneurial Program, or the LEAP program. Okay. Next question is regarding fee waivers. In regards to fee waivers, I have not been able to find the cost of permit fees from the building department. And I don't know how to calculate the cost associated with the fee. How do I get this number? Kristen?
Yeah, I saw this question and I just pinged the building department. People have had various responses to this issue with the building and planning department. So I think what we need to do is go ahead and kind of table this. Unfortunately, I have heard everything from, very clear fee calculations to folks saying that there's no fees associated with building permits. So I think we'll have to circle back. I mean, obviously it's being painful for folks trying to apply for building permit fee waivers, but we'll circle back. I'll schedule a meeting with PBS to see if we can't get a better process in place.
Okay. This next question may be linked to that as well, but it says, I think the question was specifically related to how they receive and apply for their fees versus when the fees are actually due. And so this, Kristen, you and I've talked about this a bit because sometimes people submit requests for fee waivers and the fee is due, like in 48 hours.
Right.
And we can't be responsive because it takes time to go through the steps at the county. But Kristen, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, when we're looking at the period of time that, say, issued fee waiver or a direct grant funding is available to the applicant, you want to be able to spend that down over the course of 12 months, right? So when you're applying for your fee waivers, you should be looking at what fees you might be accruing over the next 12 months. But there's no way for an application to be submitted and make it through underwriting and approval, and then the drafting process of being turned into a fee waiver in 48 hours. I think, in all fairness, you want to give yourself at least 2 weeks to get through that process. So yeah, it's tricky because it does take some time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question. I think that's a partial question, and it's been addressed. Taxes are ongoing expenses. Yes, they absolutely are. Next question. What is a good way to, if any, get funding for OCAL certification? They don't really have a set fee as of now.
Yeah, I don't think that fits into the criteria currently of the grant program. I think it's something that we would have to go back to the Board of Supervisors and request as a direct grant funding option. Most certifications are based on scale of a project. So whether it's like CCOF has to do with like sales, right? You fall into like sales tiers. You're between this dollar amount and that dollar amount, and your cost of certification is A, right? So I'm assuming that there'll be some similar kind of scaled certification costs, but that again is just an assumption. But before we could even consider the funding, we would have to go back to the Board of Supervisors and ask them to add that into the direct grant criteria. I do want to go back to this question, if we may. There is a question about having both a cannabis facilities license and a separate cultivation license. If an individual applied under their facilities license and then also wanted to spend funds, equity funds on their cultivation site, I don't necessarily see a problem in that. It's the applicant that's eligible. So if the applicant wants to spend money on 2 or 3 different licensed projects that they're the license holder of, I think they would be eligible across the board. But Paula, am I missing something here?
I think the issue is, so we've had situations where somebody has a current cannabis facilities business license and an expired cultivation license. So if the cultivation license has expired, can they take funding from their direct grant where they applied as a cannabis facilities business and apply it to a cultivation site where the license has expired?
I think that's a little tricky, because if your cultivation license is expired, you shouldn't be operating. But if you wanted to apply for reapplying for that cultivation license at the state, right, that expense for reapplying seems like it would be perfectly eligible for direct grant funds.
Right.
So,
go ahead.
No, please.
Well, the reason it gets tricky also, so people have a current cannabis facilities business license and an expired cultivation license. So when you say license, because might be where I'm having a hard time digesting this, with the exception of the cannabis facilities business license, the county issues permits and the state issues licenses. Right.
So if the cannabis cultivation permit at the local level has been expired, it's unlikely that it's eligible for renewal. Once cultivation and nursery permits expire, they extinguish themselves according to the ordinance. So unless we've been working with the applicant for that renewal, if it's just gone unattended, right, it likely has expired and extinguished itself. But if it's an expired renewal application that we've been working with someone else, you may be able to qualify for a fee waiver for that renewal application, right? So it is a little tricky and definitely a case-by-case basis, but there's nothing that necessarily prohibits an applicant who has multiple types of permitted activity in the county from utilizing direct grant funds for their multitude of permitted activities. It just
as long as they're all current.
Each has to meet the criteria of eligibility.
Right. Okay, great. Insurance question. If the contractor has their own insurance, do we still have to get it? Meaning the entrepreneur. What if the owner of a family member wants to complete the building project? Does the surety bond suffice? We have no residents on the property, so finding insurance has been difficult. Thanks.
So I would love to answer this because there's kind of multiple tricky questions here. So if you're working with a licensed contractor and they have their own insurance, what you want to do is ask them for a copy of that policy so we can put it in front of our risk management team here at the county, and they can verify whether or not the contractor's insurance policy meets the county's requirements. So that's how you would start that process. And I don't know whether or not the contractor's insurance policy will be adequate because it really depends on the type of policy and the amount of liability that that policy holds. So risk would have to review it and sign off on it. What if I just lost the question.
Yeah.
Let's see, maybe it's in the answered box. What if, the second part of the question was, what if you don't have a home on the, if you don't have a home on the policy, on the property, and you need insurance. There is project insurance available. So I've been able to, for other projects outside of Mendocino County in my previous pre-Mendocino County life, been able to pull specific liability insurance policies for projects, right? Specifically for grants. So I do think you can look at, project-based liability policies. The third part of the question is about surety bonds. Surety bonds do not cover the liability for your project. the surety bond that you're required to get for your state license is specific to defaulting to the state, basically. It gives the state the ability to recoup funds should there be some sort of defaulting between, say, violations that are accrued or other fees that the applicant defaults on. So surety bonds do not cover the grant agreement insurance requirements. And I hope I answered all of those. The screen jumped in the Q&A and I lost the question. So Paula, do you remember anything else out of that list?
I don't. And if the question wasn't answered, you might submit it by email and we can answer it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. I just want to acknowledge that it's 7 minutes till the meeting is supposed to end and we have 34 more questions. So I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them, but please send them by email and we'll be as responsive as possible. But there are 2 questions that I really want to make sure get addressed, if I can move to those right now. The first question is, do 2021 county cannabis taxes need to be paid to be approved for a direct grant? So, Kristen, the question really is, when do people have to file or pay for their 2021 taxes? What is the deadline?
I mean, I think the issue here is people do it a multitude of ways, right? They file quarterly over the course of the 2021 year. And if you don't file and pay quarterly, then you're subject to a true up in April of this year for your 2021 taxes. So we have been directed to prioritize those who do not have delinquent taxes. So currently, if you haven't paid your 2021 taxes, they are unlikely to be delinquent unless you filed quarterly and then failed to pay that quarterly filing. Then you might be considered delinquent, right, for a 21 tax year, right? Because you filed, said you were going to pay in the quarter and then didn't. So it really is about being delinquent. If you come back with, we send everyone over to treasurer tax collector to verify tax status because we don't have visibility on it here in the department. And if it comes back delinquent, we have to deprioritize that grant agreement until you've paid your taxes and we've gotten confirmation from the treasurer tax collector that you're no longer delinquent. So I'm going to kick it back to you, Paula.
Okay, great. So there isn't really a deadline, like you don't have to pay your 2021 taxes by April 15th, for example.
If you're subject to a true up. So I think really we're checking for delinquency. If you're delinquent, according to the treasurer tax collector, we aren't going to process your agreement. That's the easiest way to look at this.
Yep, that's fair. Okay, great. Let's see. I was told we needed auto insurance, but we don't have any sort of transport or any sort of license that requires a vehicle. Our contractors have insurance.
Great. So provide your contractor's insurance policy. And when your grant agreement has completed underwriting with the Elevate team, it'll get kicked over to us with those policies for review. And then we'll send it over to Risk to see if you need any additional insurance policies. And then we'll communicate back with you after Risk has reviewed your contractor's policy, your budget, and determine whether or not they feel the need for an auto-related policy to be included.
Great. Okay. Next question. If the business is owned 50-50, should both owners each individually apply for the direct grant as individually apply for the fee waivers? How does that work?
Yeah, so, I think the issue right now is there's no allowance in the equity policy manual for businesses, right? So when an individual applies for equity eligibility and then for a grant, the individual has to spend that check down. If they want to apply it to their business, they have to be a sole proprietor of that business currently, right? So if Paula and I owned a business together, we both applied as individuals for equity and we both qualified, right? We could both write direct grant budgets, right, for one project for that business because the county has the ability to fund both Paula and Kristen for those projects, right? But the fee waivers are a little trickier. If Paula and I own the permit together, there's only one fee waiver. So either Paula or I would apply for the fee waiver for our permit renewal, right? We wouldn't both apply for 50% of it. One of us would apply for the fee renewal, and then maybe someone else would apply for the Appendix G, right? So that would be my recommendation for dealing with that.
Great. I'm going to go to the next question. Swrcb fees are due at the beginning of February. Can the fees be given back?
No. So
Right.
the program is for expenses you are going to have going forward. They cannot be for expenses that you've already paid.
Correct.
So if you could apply for next year's fees, right? So if you pay in February and you want to write into your grant application because it's a 12-month spend down on the direct grant award, right? The cost of fees for next year, you could, put them towards your fees next year, but you would be required to turn in a receipt for 2023's fees when you reconcile the direct grant budget with the Elevate team. So I hope that helps.
Great. The next question, Kristen just answered, but I'll just highlight them. One person says, we simply drive to and from the site and occasionally pick up materials, but that is it. From listening to this, we do not need auto insurance. And I think that what you need to do is submit your budget proposal. If your project doesn't require insurance or you're not a delivery person, doesn't require auto insurance, you're not a delivery person, you're not a transporter, you're not a distributor, something whose business requires a vehicle, then most likely you are not going to be required to have auto insurance. But again, that has to be approved on a case-by-case basis by examining your budget and letting risk take a look at how you plan to use the funds.
And that's really key because the Elevate team, the MCP staff, we do not determine whether or not your grant agreement needs a liability policy or increased auto insurance policy. Risk determines that. So I just think it's important for folks to understand that we don't have a one-size-fits-all answer for these liability, like attachment G questions for grant agreement insurance policies. We look at the grant agreement and say, okay, this looks like it meets all of the criteria. And then we have to send it over to risk to see if additional insurance policies are needed for any reason whatsoever, whether it's liability for the project or an increased liability on the auto insurance. I do want to say that we're at 5:01. I'm obligated to let my staff go home, so I need to do that. I want to really apologize that we didn't get through the high volume of questions. It's a more significant volume of questions than what we're used to at these meetings, which makes me think that we should probably plan more time for the next meeting to ensure that we get through the questions. And I also want to apologize to the folks who were on the phone and didn't get to personally ask your question. Our next meeting will be the third Wednesday in February. We'll send out a save the date notice. And please, you can email these questions to the Elevate team. And if you don't have an email address for the Elevate team, you can send your questions to cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org, and we will help connect you to the Elevate team to get your questions answered. And I do want to really thank everyone for joining us today. It was a remarkable turnout. We certainly hope you'll join us for the next meeting, and let your colleagues and peers and friends know that these meetings are available for folks to come ask questions and participate and get more knowledge about how to engage in the local equity entrepreneur program. So with that said, I think we should probably adjourn so that staff can go home to their families.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And please definitely email your questions, and we look forward to hearing from you.